Since the early 1900s, the intelligent quotient test, also known as the IQ test, has been recognized as a means of measuring a person's natural intelligence. Out of all the historically acclaimed tests, the IQ test is utilized throughout the world as an accepted method of measuring the level of an individual's intelligence, or natural intelligence. A closer examination of this test exposes the flaws provided by the IQ test, which identify the cultural and age biases. Even though 100 years later, the IQ test is universally recognized as an accurate tool to measure a person's innate intelligence, closer examination of the test illustrates that the IQ test reflects a cultural bias, time perspective bias, and a focus on learned skill sets rather than innate intelligence. It is my intent to demonstrate that the IQ test is a fundamentally flawed system. One of the key flaws found in the IQ tests are the culturally biased or time frame biased questions. With cultural bias, there are several components that can be identified when establishing this particular bias: race, religion, and social status. Professor Greenfield proved that there are cases where cultural specific questions do not reflect a person's level of intelligence, such as the spatial relation ability and shifting perspective. An example of this is the test taker is first asked to identify an upside-down alarm clock. Second, to rotate mentally a quarter turn to the right before matching the resulting visual perspective with one of 5 drawings. Greenfield concluded that the task is extremely culture-specific. Note that it requires the knowledge of what a back-end alarm clock looks like. It also requires the knowledge of an arrow as a visual symbol, as well as even more specific knowledge that the arrow, as portrayed, does not symbolize a horizontal direction in a flat plane, but rather represents a rotation in the 3rd dimension. Having this prior knowledge defeats the purpose of seeing whether an individual has innate intelligence. This is a form of knowledge that only some cultures provide, while others, such as third world countries, might not have yet introduced to. The IQ test is recognized as a worldwide measuring tool for intelligence. Has actually different IQ averages for countries. Several IQ averages. For the US, our IQ average is 98. In Austria, the IQ average is about 102. On the low scale, in Ethiopia, the IQ average is about 62, and in Nigeria, it is about 67. Also, these statistics are culturally biased due to the fact that it is unlikely that a quarter of the population for any of these countries has taken an IQ test. Also, the question is, how does one determine how many people can be considered as a nation's IQ average? Because culture provides different forms of knowledge, it is a bias to claim that the IQ test actually determines one's natural intelligence. Cultural bias being one more common flaw in the intelligence quotient test is not the only flaw. Another flaw can be found in the test is ageism bias, which can be accounted for both the younger and older generations. In the case of the older generation, I found a question that was biased towards the younger generation. Grimes and Arden stated that the question provided in the IQ test asked to identify the following: choose a word not similar to Davenport. There were 4 choices provided. 1 was a love seat, 2, sofa, 3, bed, and 4 was a desk. The answer from all these is actually a love seat. Most people would assume that it was not a love seat because it's very similar to a sofa. Well, first of all, you have to have a knowledge of what Davenport is. Davenport has 2 definitions. 1 is an ornamental writing desk that has kind of a slant like this, or like an architect's drafting table. And Davenport is also basically a sofa that folds out into a bed. In both the cultural and age biases, there is a clear evidence that prior knowledge is necessary to answer these questions. Therefore, the IQ system cannot prove an individual's natural intelligence. Another fundamental flaw is that the IQ test emphasizes skill sets unrelated to a person's innate intelligence. A bias can be based on the fact that an individual with certain skills can perform poorly on IQ tests, yet excel in other valuable positions that involve their particular set of skills. An example of this would be Muhammad Ali. Many people have called him a genius boxer and fighting, yet there are those who thought of him as a dummy. Eric Neal, an ESPN journalist, stated that Muhammad Ali scored a 78 in a 1964 Army IQ test. Dr. Highfield, a co-author of the studies published in the journal Neuron, stated several different circuits contribute to intelligence, each with its own unique capacity. A person may well be good in one of these areas, but they are just as likely to be bad in the other two. Dr. Highfield is referring to the components measured in the IQ test, which are vocabulary, reading comprehension, and spatial recognition. If we are to consider that only 2 of these 3 skills encompass intelligence, then it is clear that Muhammad Ali had incredibly high spatial relations ability and clearly failed in the other 2. Muhammad Ali is definitely sociable and at times provides humor to his fans with quotes like, "I said I was the greatest, not the smartest." Muhammad Ali accepts the fact that he does not have a high IQ in terms of vocabulary skills and reading comprehension, but he possesses another skill set, the ability to react quickly to an opponent's movements, to make decisions on a split second, and to determine if punches are effective in a situation. These skill sets, although our boxing skill sets, are slow forms of intellect. Because of these skill sets, Muhammad Ali excelled in his career. Is it okay if I skip to my conclusion?
Sure.
I guess I'm out of time. In conclusion, there should be some means of determining how flawed these tests are, in order to determine if they have an impact on people's lives, and if so, tests that use similar structures, such as the standardized test, which have a major impact on people's lives, need to set up a manner where questions are not biased due to cultural differences and do not reflect on how well a person has practiced. These questions need to be based on how intelligent the individual is by determining the raw knowledge, innate skills, and natural intellect that each person possesses. And by setting this example, for the IQ tests and other tests like the SATs or the psychometrics, we will most likely change their structure in order to show performance that is not biased and is solely based on universal knowledge and innate intelligence. I guess that's it.
Are you scheduled to speak today? Get an evaluation form, put your name on it. Hang on a second.
Skip the 11 minutes.
What was the time?
7:42.
All right. And you needed to because you were out of time. Yeah, well, practice is one of those things. I thought that you did a nice job delivering the presentation for the most part at a good, deliberate speed. So it's not that you were going too fast or too slow, it's that you just have too much information and you're going to have to edit it, and there's a lot of background information that you're providing. I thought that you had a clear statement of what your proposition was. The preview is there. It's a little bit disguised, but I could make it out. I think you need to do a little bit more to talk about why it's important, because IQs are being used for some particular purpose, and it sounds to me like your argument is that if it's being used for this purpose, there's a problem if it's inaccurate or it doesn't represent something. So for instance, if it's being used to screen people out of jobs or to distribute research grants or to determine whether or not somebody gets into school or something along those lines, then that gives us a reason to care about this. I thought that the internal structure was very clear. You did a good job signposting and transitioning between those points. You had some good examples that you illustrated. The one thing that seems to be missing from all of the research is dates, because I got a lot of authorities that are being quoted, and a couple of them provide good examples in their explanations, but I don't know when this information was compiled, and so I wouldn't be able to tell, for instance, if revised IQs done subsequent to this research that are currently being used make the same mistakes. That's why you want to give us this information, because suppose the respondent comes up and says, oh, the examples that you were talking about are all problems and flaws of the IQ test from the 1960s, but they recognize all those problems, they fixed them in the 1970s, and for the last 30 years we've been using these other ones, and I don't have any basis for knowing when your information was gathered. So that's why you want to have that contemporary reference in the argument. Okay, thank you. Oh, one other thing, lose the gum while you're giving the speech. It's a little, the smacking.